Welcome to the podcast of Data and Analytics in Business. We will learn from the leading industry experts using data and analytics to solve the problems and create values in practice. We will also learn where the industry is heading to and how data and analytics will shape the industry in the future. Most importantly, how they are preparing their business for digital transformation and disruption in the future. I'm your host, Jason Tan, and thank you for listening. In this episode, we have got Brant Cooper. He is a New York Times best-selling author, and some of his books include The Lean Entrepreneur and The Entrepreneur Guide to Customer Development. Over the years, Brant trains thousands of entrepreneurs and corporate executives globally on new and advanced techniques of management, business development, product launch, and disruption. Now, Brant shared with me what is the role of the data and the analytics when it comes to the lean methodology and ecosystem, and how entrepreneur and the corporate can utilize the data and different metrics in their product development whilst incorporating the lean methodology. Taking from his experience of training entrepreneur in building this disruptive technology and company, Brant shared with us how this method could be equally be utilized and deployed in the large corporate. And beyond that, how the data science team can be brought into the picture and the lean ecosystem to build a cross-functional team in order to deliver successful result at the large corporate. Last but not least, he offers some insights how to bring your data analytic team and your other internal team to be closer to the customer so that they have a better understanding and empathy about what your customer are doing and hoping to achieve when they go on to the customer journey in buying your product. As a result of that, how could your team then incorporate this metric and information to build a better product? If you are someone who is mid-level or senior manager in managing a technology team, a marketing team, or analytic teams in a large corporate, and you have always believed in agile methodology with lean management to manage your project, this is the episode that you do not want to miss. If you have any question for me or Brant, send us an email or connect with Brant directly on LinkedIn. His new book, Disruption for All, is also about to be released, and make sure that you check that out and order that when it is available. If you love what you are going to listen in this episode, make sure you subscribe to the podcast, and we'll surely bring you more episodes how different business leaders around the world are using data science in running a high-performing organization. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Hey, Brant. Welcome to the Analytics Show. I'm super duper excited to have you here today.
Thanks for having me. I'm excited too.
Now, I'm going to start live with the interview. So we have done quite a bit of research, and there is so much about you on the internet. Now, for my research, I found out that you have published and self-published your books, The Lean Entrepreneur and The Entrepreneur Guide to Customer Development. Tell us a bit more about yourself as an author. That what made you interested in writing and publishing books?
Yeah, so Entrepreneur's Guide to Customer Development is self-published. Lean Entrepreneur was published through Wiley, so that one was not self-published. But not that it matters. I've always been a writer. I've always liked to write. I actually wrote a book a couple years out of college. I sort of dropped out of my career at the time, my new career, my post-college career, and wrote a novel. It was actually called Joshua's Way. It was never published. It was really not a very good novel. So So I've always been a writer, but just, not a very good fiction writer, I guess. So it took me a while after that. I don't know, a good 20 years or something before I try again. And that was with a business book.
I read the review. I think there was some really positive review about the book. So I think you chose the right route in terms of the direction of as a writer.
Well, one of these days, maybe I'll go give that a try again. Maybe I've learned a thing or two in the last couple decades.
I'm curious to know, what do you think is the difference between going through the publishing route versus the self-publishing? I think I have met a lot of entrepreneurs who have done the publishing, but I actually never really asked them that question. Given that you have done that both, what do you think is the key difference between the two?
Well, it's really the key difference is what is the desired outcome. So early on, don't make any money going through a publisher, to be honest, at least when you're first starting. If you get big hits, you can make money. But most people, be honest, don't make a whole lot of money going through the traditional publishing route. You can actually make more money self-publishing. And the reason is because you get to keep all the money. And the marketing is all up to you, and the marketing and selling. And so I think that there's a lot to be gained from self-publishing. I don't think people look down on it like the old days. It was called vanity publishing. And I don't think people look down on it so much anymore. It's hard work. If it's a good book and it has something to say, people will buy it. And it does lend credibility because there is your credibility there in the pages. And so if people read it and they share it and they like it, then that builds your credibility. And so I think self-publishing is great. Publishing in a traditional method allows you to hit the big lists if you're so lucky. I was fortunate enough to do that. Their distribution into bookstores and that sort of thing and they've got salespeople. So how much they actually put behind the book in terms of the marketing varies from publisher to publisher and deal to deal. So you should not go with a traditional publisher thinking that they're going to do the marketing for you. That's not true. So if you're just writing for the first time and you understand that you're going to have to do all of the marketing, maybe it makes sense to make the first one your own, make it self-published, and maybe that will help you gain credibility and help you sell the services that you're hoping to sell.
Great stuff. And especially with the internet and perhaps Amazon, it looks like the self-publishing is a better route anyway. Now, I know that you have a new book coming up and currently is on the pre-order or the release mode. Tell us a bit more about this new book and what is new that we will get to read on this book.
Yeah, so both the customer development book and the lean entrepreneur book were really around the mindset of teams and people in their daily work on how they should be out in learning mode, in exploration mode whenever they face uncertainty. And those books were geared towards startup entrepreneurs and maybe corporate innovators. And what I learned over the last 5 or 6 years is that really those entrepreneurial techniques, the mindset should be applied to wherever there's uncertainty. And I think we've all learned in the last year that there's massive amounts of uncertainty everywhere. And so I wanted to write a broader book for corporate leaders and other leaders on how they can scale this mindset through their organization, which is very difficult to do because people are very focused on the sort of the execution mindset, doing what they know. It's what people are comfortable with. They want to do what they did yesterday because they know it worked yesterday. And when you face uncertainty, what you did yesterday might not work anymore. And so you have to be in this exploration mode. You have to learn how to balance the exploration and the execution work that you do. And so that's what this new book is about, how we need to apply those techniques and that mindset wherever there's uncertainty. And that means in your startup, it means in your small business, it means in your massive corporation, and it means in a bunch of other entities as well. I think that fundamentally, the structure of our institutions in society are going to change. That's education, it's government, it's investing, it's nonprofits, it's other organizations. All of these structures today are built upon the assembly line, and we're not in the industrial age anymore, and they're all going to change. And so that's really how we get there, I believe, is through this mindset. And that's what the book is about.
I so agree with that. And in fact, I have prepared some of the question, not knowing that what this news book about, but I actually prepared some question for you in terms of like how to apply this sort of mindset and methodology for the large corporation, for the non-profit organization, or any size of the company. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit in terms of the question I prepared, but I want to come back to this one just in a second. Now, in one of your books, and also the things that you highly recommend and you do in a lot of your talks, is that you are a proponent of the 5 E's of the disruption for all. Empathy, I believe, experiment, evidence, equilibrium, and ethics. Please, would you elaborate this a bit, and what does it mean for business?
Those 5 elements are what I describe as being this mindset that all people need to adopt, I think, in all of these different organizations. And so empathy is about understanding people. It's about understanding others deeply. It's not about, like, say, asking them what they want and doing what they say. It's not what you would do in their situation. It's accepting, listening, understanding another point of view without judging it. And this is applied to customers, right? So that's sort of design thinking, maybe, or human-centered design are good examples of developing empathy for customers. But it also should be applied to other people at work, your employees, your colleagues, even your leadership, even your bosses. And of course, not to get too far afield, but you could apply it to everybody out in society. You could apply it to your family and your relatives and people you meet on the street. If we all tried to understand each other a bit better before we jump to conclusions or judgments, we would all be better off. So experiment, I actually call exploration. And that's just, as I mentioned earlier, it's this mindset around, hey, maybe I don't know all the answers. Maybe I'm facing uncertainty. I can't just do it the way I've always done it. And so exploration mode is running experiments. It's willing to challenge your own assumptions in a disciplined way. So we encourage lean startup style experiments, rapid experimentation in order to cut through those assumptions. Evidence is using data and insights to help inform your decisions. So again, now we're trying to cut through our biases that we all hold. And if we want to ask for funding from our bosses or from investors, we give them evidence, not just our ideas. Ideas really are a dime a dozen. So you bring evidence to the table in order to convince people that your idea is the right way to go. And we have to be sort of self-aware of our own biases and not look for evidence that confirms what we believe, but rather that challenges what we believe. Equilibrium is this idea, again, it kind of applies as individuals as well as to larger groups. As individuals, there's a lot of things that make us humans, and we should be working to find that balance as best we can. I personally use a personal Kanban to try to help me balance these things. And it's work, obviously, but it's also recreation or creativity or spirituality or wellness or spending time with the family. All of these things we can put out in a Kanban board or a sprint backlog, just like any agile team, which allows us to choose which things we're going to be working on in any particular moment. And so we can choose from these different elements in our life in order to be a more rounded, well-balanced person. Inside the organization, you provide some of that same responsibility to leaders in the sense of giving human beings that work for them space to find that balance. But also there are organizational elements that need to be put into balance as well. And that's typically around balancing that execution and the exploration work. We tend to incentivize and reinforce execution mode, even when we don't know or we're facing complex situations. And so we need to address those type of situations differently. And it's up to the organization to teach people how to balance when they should be exploring and when they should be executing. And then finally, even on a macro sense from the economy, we have to look at ways that create a more equitable outcome for everyone. And what that means is a balance in our economy and increasing the power of workers and consumers in their relationship to corporations, which will achieve a greater equity, a more equitable balance. So then finally, ethics. I think that in this digital age, we're gathering tons of information, not only data on people, but understanding and observing behaviors and logging that. And it's just really our responsibility to treat our fellow human beings with ethics, and as corporations adhere to the laws and regulations that citizens have put into force through their representatives. And really, ultimately, the mission of our companies really should be to create value for consumers, for customers. That's why we're in business. And I think that's part of the ethics equation. So that was a pretty long answer there, but we got through all 5 E's.
No, I think that is a great explanation. And as someone who have worked in both small company and a large corporation, I can relate to a lot of that. Especially, I think, when working in the large corporation, those are the value that ones would want to have their team or the staff of having, right? However, in the startup or in the smaller company, I know that you have done a lot of great works and advice for the startup and the entrepreneur. Very often, they will very much focus on the execution. They will be focusing on the sales. They will focus on the building. Now, as much as these are important, both short and long term, how would you advise them to place a great emphasis on these 5 years of disruption that will be valuable for the long-term growth while they are so focused on the short-term execution?
Yeah, I think that startups naturally behave in this way because a lot of what they are facing is uncertainty. And so in the very earliest stages, it's very typical to hire people who wear multiple hats, right? Well, why are they wearing multiple hats? They're wearing multiple hats because there's a bunch that needs to get done in order to move the company forward. And so just merely defining one's own roles by your own expertise or what you want to do often doesn't move the company forward. That starts to change when there's some success. And when there's success, then oftentimes it's investors and other advisors that start putting pressure on the startup to start defining their roles and departments just like a big company. The irony, of course, is that big companies struggle with all of this. And so why we move so quickly to make small companies look like big companies is really a mystery. I think that startup entrepreneurs typically want to do something more than make money. Startup entrepreneurs usually start businesses because they feel like they're making a change in the world. And so that's a culture phenomena. And so again, normally what I've seen is that the startups grow for a while, maintaining that cultural aspect of we want to change the world for the better. We're working for trying to create value for our customers. That's why we're in business. And then when they start growing rapidly, and again, if investors are involved, that often changes the focus away from the value to creation to merely financial success. And of course, investors are doing that because that's the way they reap the most benefit. They get to flip their shares to subsequent investors if they're successful. And so it's really important for early stage startup founders who have and want an ethos in their company around ethical behavior and around achieving their mission. Then it's really up to them to get the right investors on board and to be adamant about maintaining the cultural aspects of the companies that they want to keep. So I definitely think it's possible. I think that you see a lot of big tech companies that have lost their way ethically, but I don't think it was the intention of the original founders for it to be that way. I also think there are other companies that are fairly successful at maintaining their ethics, even through growth phases. Ultimately, it comes down to the founders and the management team to ensure that the culture that they want is one that they develop. And a lot of it really comes down to literally how you structure the company. So just for an example, large companies tend not be very customer focused. They're immune to new information that's out in the world, and they're unable to respond to that information, and they move too slow. So those three things, this lack of customer focus, their lack of agility, and how slow they move, is based upon the fact that the structure of their company is defined by departments that have formed silos and rules of engagement, so that anytime anybody wants to make any sort of change, they have to navigate up and down the hierarchy and across all of these silos to get permission to do anything. And so if there's any disruption, say like COVID, that happens in the world, the big companies are unable to respond because of the very structure of their company.
Absolutely. I so agree with that. Now, moving to the books and the various talk that you have given, focusing on the lean methodology and also the customer development, how would you advise the startup to say, well, the data and the analytic is going to be a very important part of it, and how they should juggle and balance that part of the world alongside with their product development or the business development while they are building the business? And I think the same thing could be applied to the large organization. How would you help them from the lens of the lean methodologies?
Yeah, so I think that when most people, especially again, the big companies, but startups too, when they think about managing people, they think about KPIs or maybe OKRs, which typically are developed by looking at the desired outcomes and then rolling them backwards to where you are today and defining these milestones and putting those milestones on the calendar. And then that's how people's performance is measured. And the problem with that is that when you're doing anything within uncertainty, the performance metrics are wrong. They're not germane. And so what people need to learn how to do is develop what I call learning metrics. Startup investors actually do learning metrics pretty darn well. And why is that? Well, if I'm going to invest in your company and I know that I'm not going to get a return on my investment for 5 to 10 years, then I can't measure vanity metrics. Vanity metrics don't mean much to me. How many logins do you have? How many website hits do you have? How much money do you have? How much money are your customers bringing in? Again, I know that we all know what the desired outcome is. The desired outcome is millions of dollars and thousands of customers. Well, so that's great. But we can keep those metrics in mind, and we can even use those as KPIs or OKRs and break them down and all the rest. But we also have to figure out what is indicating that we're making progress towards a desired outcome. And I call these learning impact metrics. So anytime we're trying to sell a new product or service, we're asking customers to change their behavior. They're doing something today, and we're building this new product hoping that they're going to use it, right? So they're going to change from what they're doing today to starting to use our product. We know that they will use our product only if whatever we build, the features, the functionality we build, solves their problem better than the way they're currently doing it. So the learning metric is based upon the behavior change. So I can ask, what does a customer need to be doing with my product that indicates that they're getting the value out of the product that I promised them? And this is commonly in the startup world known as an active user or an engaged user. And so it's not number of logins, it's logins plus interacting with the product in super specific ways. Like, I don't know, think up a silly example like YouTube or video sharing. So I believe a satisfied user within a particular market segment, say they want to be a YouTube star. So what I'm going to say is a satisfied user is somebody that uploads a video once a week, shares it with 100 people, and gets 50 views. That's one market segment, maybe an early person who wants to do a YouTube star as opposed to somebody that's got a huge following. But I can then measure how many customers are actually behaving in that way. And I might be wrong. Maybe my metric's wrong. And over time, I can change the metric. But there's like people, once they achieve a particular metric, I know that they're sticky. I know that they're going to hang around. I know that they're a customer for a while, right? So that's in my active user. And so I'm going to track how many customers are active users every month. And then I'm going to start measuring, well, what is my month over month growth of active users? And so that's a pretty common type of metric, but it's a learning metric because it indicates that we're figuring it out. And then after I've achieved that metric, I'm going to look in other places inside my funnel. And so like, well, now I need to figure out why are not more people converting into paying customers? And I need to look at the behavior. What indicates that they're ready to move from one stage of the funnel to the other? So my learning impact metrics framework, which is a value stream discovery, goes through 7 states that a customer goes through from first becoming aware to becoming passionate about a product. And so for each one of those states, you can hypothesize, here's the customer behavior that indicates that they're at that state. Here's what I must do as a business to get the customer to behave in that way. And this is how I'll measure it. And so that allows you to focus your employees, your team on how do we improve that number? Do we have the right activities? Do we understand that the customer is actually behaving in a way that indicates that they're at that state? How do I move them from this state to the next state? In that way, all of your customer segments become funnels, and you have all sorts of places where you can run specific experiments and do empathy work in order to figure out how you improve that number. And every time you improve that number, your business is more successful. So that's how I think about the analytics and the data. It's not that people need to be doing business intelligence queries. It's that they need to define for each market segment, they need to define what that funnel looks like and how you're going to measure each stage of the funnel. And that gives you the metrics that then you should share with bosses and with investors.
I love the way that how you describe that. And in relation to that, one of the software as a service product that I have got, one of the metrics that I have got for my engineer and also the front-end designer is the weekly active user. Now, the weekly active user helps us to understand how much our members love our product, and that indicates that how often they come in and also how long do they stay every time that they comes in. So I can tell.
Well, so I would recommend you take it one step further. So it's not just that they come in and not just how long they stay, but what specifically are they doing? Are they using the product? Yeah. And so what's cool about that for your audience is the moment you learn, like, what are the top 3 pieces of functionality that my most satisfied users are using, you move that forward in the onboarding process. Right? You get them to try to do those first 3 things the first time they log in. You do a drip campaign where you're sending them emails. Here's your top 3 tips. Do this. Because the sooner that you get those people into being an active user, again, you're creating capacity for growth. And it could be that one market segment uses the product slightly different than another market segment. And so now you have a bunch of insights around, wow, I actually have different market segments in here. How do I get more of that particular type of user? Which one pays me more? Which one has less churn? What are my leading indicators of churn? I mean, it really is, it's amazing how once you focus in on those very specific items, it teaches you so much about your business and how to grow it. And the other thing that I'll say is that once you have the data, and all that data already exists, to be honest, I make a joke that the answers to all of your questions are in your SQL tables. They really are, because all of that stuff is like incremented every time somebody does something. So it's all in your database. It's just getting it out. But all new features then should come with a hypothesis attached to it, right? So if somebody says, okay, we're going to build this new feature, or even marketing or sales comes to you and says, oh, no, you got to put in this feature. Everybody's asking for it. And then you say, well, let's create this hypothesis. If we build this feature, X percentage of people will do Z. They will use this feature on a daily basis or on a weekly basis. And that sort of, if it doesn't come true, nobody uses it, you pull the feature back out. And you also teach your salesperson a lesson that was they have to interact with their customers differently because they're getting bad intelligence.
That being said, I think what I found, the luxury that I have got or my team have got is that because we are so close to this application or the system, and often we have these metrics that we can look at, that we can relate to in order to use it as a guidance for us to continue with our product and development. Now, that being said, though, in the large corporation, often you will have all of these data scientists, you have this analytic team, or even to the extent of the business or the portfolio team, they are actually not that close to the customer. They are actually not that close to the system, especially the enterprise system. That being said, they are very often so far away and being removed from that. And I find that because of that, people tend to work on a lot of the silver signing things, a lot of the sexy things, but then it's very hard to pinpoint exactly the things that they are building to what you were describing. What is it trying to achieve for the customer? Does it help them to move from one step to another step? Does it help them to solve a particular problem that they are looking for? What would be your advice for the people working in the large corporate to be able to put themselves in the shoes of what you just described and working like the smaller company where they are so much closer to the front line?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think that it's pretty difficult with the legacy products. I encourage startups as well as in the big corporations. You should not be writing a feature if you can't measure its usage. And so that should just be part of an engineering task, right? Anytime you're building something, you're also exposing a way to measure it. And if we just made that the rule, then that data would be so much more easily exposed. And in a similar way, I think that we get to the point where people are building or attaching analytics as soon as a product is being developed. There's a lot of great analytics packages out there. I'm sure you're aware of them. I'm not sure how much they've moved into the engineering groups in the big corporates. Part of it is, I think, again, they get very siloed. And so the way they're measured is really around accomplished feature rather than whether the feature does any good. And I think it's the siloed nature. I think they would be better off if they were working in a cross-functional, interdisciplinary organization so that on one team that is responsible for a product, they're able to look at the usage data. They're able to look at whole funnel, whole values, rather than sort of different, each responsible for a step. The product owner should be really responsible for soup to nuts, from awareness all the way through passion, in my opinion. And so structuring a company that way is what's going to allow them to do what you're saying. I mean, listen, the customer does not view us like we're structured, right? The customer sees a product and marketed to and sold to and supported or not supported. And so there's no reason why the company is structured the way it is now. It makes way more sense to think about the customer's journey and structure the company appropriate to that, rather than sort of the 20th century mindset that the company is structured based upon the assembly line.
That being said, I think cross-functional is a great idea. And I have seen numbers and numbers of companies are now trying to build up the cross-functional team in order to deliver the project. However, one of the minor issues that, in my personal view, that I have seen is that very often the people within the cross-functional team, they are not just in one cross-functional team, but they are in like 5 or 6 cross-functional team. Is almost like, okay, I am the guy of the data, right? So I'm going to be in this cross-functional team to advise with the data. again, I'll be doing exactly the same thing for the other 5 teams. Likewise, someone who is from the marketing will be in the same position. To some extent, I suspect is more of the dilemma of people. They want their staff to be fully utilized to 100% capacity. However, I don't believe anyone could focus on 5 different projects or 6 different projects at any one time and still be able to come out a quality solution and outcome for each of these projects. Do you think that is the challenges and that is some sort of a dilemma that you are seeing in the cross-functional team these days in the large corporation?
Yeah, I think it's funny. I mean, what you're describing specifically is not a problem or a function of being a cross-functional team. It's how they're being managed and maybe not being managed very well. Like it's an allocation of resources problem, not a cross-functional team problem. But the way I view it is, again, it's sort of along this line of uncertainty. So the greater uncertainty there is, the more diverse, the more interdisciplinary and maybe cross-functional the team should be. Because if we don't know the answers, or there's not one right answer because we're facing a complex situation, the greater the backgrounds and the experience and the expertise, you're more likely to come up with something that works for more people than if the opposite were happening, right? That everybody had the same backgrounds and the same education and the same level of experience, then you're going to get less creative solutions. On the very execution certain side, where everything is known, a team itself, it only needs to be as cross-functional or interdisciplinary as the skill sets required to accomplish their mission. And so if there's no marketing dilemmas, like, if you imagine you're writing back-end code, and so I've got an agile team here, and we've got, C++ engineers, we've got SQL data experts. You don't need to throw a marketing person onto that team just because it's supposed to be cross-functional. The skill set needs to be directly tied to whatever the mission is. And so you can imagine there, I've painted a story where there's high degree of uncertainty. And so there's chemists solving physicists' problems because there's so much uncertainty that you need that level of diversity. And then all the way on the other side, which is the very known certain side, where there's not a lot of diversity in experiences or skills or domain expertise. And then it's a continuum. So the level of uncertainty then changes across the organization and different departments and different products and different initiatives that are underway. So I don't want to be cross-functional just for the sake of being cross-functional. In the example that we were talking about before, where we sort of don't know why a customer is behaving in a particular way, or we can't get them to move from one state to another, it's quite possible that you would need a variety of people there. We need an engineer, we need a marketing person, maybe a customer support person, maybe a salesperson, because they all will have ideas on how to get over that hump for that particular market segment. I mean, like, I wouldn't want to put a data analyst person on there that's going to come back with reams of data about all of this stuff, because I don't think it's pertinent. I think that the metrics that one looks at should be super focused. Again, it's not like do this broad data intelligence. Where's my BI team? I don't want to run that type of research. I want to look at something super specific. This market segment, what is their behavior? What are we trying to get them to do? Let's run a bunch of experiments to try to figure if we can get them to do that behavior. So yeah, I mean, I'm not positive I answered your question, but I think it might be in there somewhere.
No, I think you did to some extent. Now, moving on towards the large corporation, how the method described in our conversation so far, and also in your book of the Lean Entrepreneur, the Startup Blue Book, as well as your new book, can be used for building analytic solution at large corporation.
And so the question is around how do large corporations use my methodologies to build an analytics capability?
That's correct.
Yeah, interesting. I mean, so listen, I think that anybody that's working in innovation or is building internal startups, whether or not it's for products or whether it's supposed to be breakthrough or whether it's just an internal process initiative that they're trying to improve. The analytics, I would base them on the learning impact metrics that I was talking about. And if you have to do it old school analog style at first, I think that's fine. You're right on a whiteboard, the number of people that are doing XYZ. Go and ask people, go watch people. I think it starts off being very low tech. And I think that that's actually how one starts to learn what is needed. Whatever the function is inside of a large corporation, probably IT, they should act like a startup. So how they're going to build and support an analytics function inside their company is for them to treat their colleagues as if they are customers. And they should use all of the lean entrepreneur methodologies to go figure out what's the right way for them to provide analytics capability to their different internal colleagues, to their different market segments that are inside the company. And they will run across all sorts of needs from the internal startups and the innovation teams, like I described, as well as maybe also this huge business intelligence capability that strategy needs or accounting needs or actuary needs or business analysts needs. So there's going to be a range of problems that need to be solved inside the internal company that IT organizations should not be just sitting back documenting feature requests and then going and building this huge monolithic system. They need to act like a startup. They need to go focus on the individual market segments and understand what's the minimum that is required to solve a problem. So just like we teach with startups and product teams, the internal teams, and this is not just IT, this is finance, this is compliance, legal, marketing, operations, they need to act like internal startups and treat their fellow colleagues as internal customers.
I suppose some of the challenge that I feel that they are often facing, or the obstacle that they have, is the policy, the company policy in stopping them to do some of these things, right? So say, for example, for me, like within my own company, when you say about low code or no code, I can so relate to it. So what that basically means is, for me within my team, is that very often, instead of trying to build things from the scratch, instead of writing code to build product or to build a solution, and which is something that is very attractive to do because all the people are engineers. They always want to do this sort of thing because it's something that they love doing. But what I try to do is often to stop them not doing any of the coding, but rather just find whatever the solution that is available in the market and integrate that and try to do no coding or try to do as little coding as possible. And at the same time, of course, we make sure that all the compliance are ticked. We are protecting the customer data while we could still test out some of these no-code solutions before whether it solves the particular problem, and then finally we will decide to build it or not. That being said, though, the compliance of the company policy would, however, stop a lot of these engineers, the internal team at the large corporation, to be able to even to do that, to be able to try that. So what would be your advice for them who are in this sort of difficult position and the luxury that they don't necessarily have, like the small team or the startup?
Yeah, I mean, I think, there's a couple of things. One is that teams often exaggerate what they're not allowed to do, and they won't go and ask. So they'll leap to the assumption. They leap to the assumption that they're not allowed to do something. I literally, like many years ago, was in a very large paper manufacturing company, and they had one guy on this team, this lean innovation team, that was very entrepreneurial and designed this crazy experiment. And they had somebody else on the team that said, no, that's not, we can't do that. There's no way. We'll get in so much trouble. Legal will totally kill us. We can't do that. And I'm all like, well, why don't you just go and ask? And they're like, oh, no. They don't want to talk to us. No. They're too busy. No. I go, come on, walk down the office. We'll go ask. And they got an attorney, and he said, oh, just make this small little change. Just do this and you're good to go. So I actually think that these day and age, legal and compliance is a lot more willing than a lot of people let on. But you're right, those obstacles still exist. And ultimately, for this transformation to actually happen inside of these big companies, those legal teams, the compliance teams, have to rewrite the rules. And the only way they're going to do that is if their bosses tell them that they have to. But the way they'll do it is they will act like a startup and they'll say, okay, these engineers are my internal customer. And I understand based on talking to them that they have this need to interact with customers in different ways in order to run these no-code experiments. So me, as a legal compliance person, what can I do to enable them to do that? This gives the engineers then permission for the general behavior rather than sort of a instance by instance type of permission. So it could be, for example, customers have to be told that it's an experiment. It could be that you're only allowed to do up to 24 or 25 customers. Customers must leave happy. So if they thought that they were interacting with a real product and then found out later and were disappointed, you have the ability to give them $150 worth of coupons or whatever. I mean, you could just start imagining that the compliance people can come up with a set of guidelines that would allow the engineers to do that behavior. And so we have done that. We have seen that at these big, huge corporations. But you kind of have to run into that obstacle before you get over it. And you have to do, it's a lot of mindset change and culture change that has to happen before that's scalable. But and it does happen. We've seen it happen. We've helped it happen. And that's the sort of change that has to progress.
I think over the last 5 to 7 years, a lot of the large corporate, they set up the innovation team or they set up the startup team within and inside the company in the hope that some of these teams will come out innovative products that help them to scale their business growth or come out innovative product to move the process or achieve the result that all of these startups are achieving. Sadly, it seems like most of them are failing. And I think part of that is because as much as the intention is good to have this innovation team or the startup team existing within the large corporate, I felt that the challenges that they still are facing is how to navigate within the various departments, various silo, and each of these departments have their own metrics and their own personal goal. And because of that, it's very hard for them to come together to achieve the result. And slowly, it looks like people are abandoning this idea. My question for you then is, how could they achieve the same result going forward if these large corporates want to come up innovative ideas or maybe innovative product in order to stop the rival of all these technology companies eating into their pie, given that they abandon the whole idea of the startup team within the company?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I don't think that that's the problem at all. So I think that there's a whole innovation industry out there that tries to convince people that what you've just described is the case. And they all tell the same stories. Blockbuster, Nokia, maybe RIM, Kodak. It's the same 5 stories that they tell over and over and over again that they're all going to be disrupted. Xerox is like a $4 billion company, by the way. So I'm not sure that they were ever disrupted. And so I don't think that's like 5 stories in the last 50 years. So, I mean, I think that people exaggerate the problem. In other words, I don't think there's evidence that big companies need to do breakthrough disruptive innovation. So number one, I don't think there's much evidence that they can. And number two, I don't think that there's much evidence that they need to. So the reason why internal startups fail, right, it can't be because they're stopped by other departments Startups don't have those other departments. Startups aren't relying on those resources inside some bigger company. So just because a internal startup doesn't have those resources, why that doesn't stop them. Startups outside don't have those resources. I'd love to hear your estimation, Jason. How many startups does it take to create 1 billion startup, a unicorn?
Less than 1%.
Right. So less than 1%. I mean, it's probably closer to 1,000, right? Or 1,000 startups create maybe 4 big successes, 4 unicorns. Let's say that's true, right? So how is it that a corporate's going to do breakthrough or disruptive innovation with their little innovation lab? They would have to replicate the whole startup ecosystem in order to get the unicorns. I mean, so purely just from a numbers sense, it doesn't make any sense. And so I agree with you that these labs are silly. They're like, oh, here's 4 or 5 startup teams. Go do breakthrough innovation. And oh, by the way, you need to show me my return on investment by the end of the year. I mean, it's just farcical. So I don't think that they can do it, and I don't think that they need to do it. So I think that, in my estimation, what they should be working on is figuring out where their growth is going to come from over the different time horizons. And so if you're trying to figure out what's going to happen 5, 6, 7 years down the road, then you should be out doing startup scouting, technology scouting, investing. You should be understanding what demographic changes are happening and how that might change your existing markets. You should be looking at opportunities brought about by emerging countries. Where are some of the developing countries going to be in 5 years? You should be looking at trends that might be able to tell you, hey, let's tweak our existing products. Maybe we can extend their life. Maybe we can go after different market segments. There's technology that we're using in this particular product line over here. Are there other places to apply it? So they've got so many more resources to rely on than startups do. And they should be thinking about how to use their expertise, their resources, their existing markets, breaking things apart, assembling them differently, combining them with third parties. There's all sorts of work that they could be doing that crosses their whole entire organization that is never going to come out of that little innovation lab that we threw up over there that's got 5 teams in it. I mean, it's just not going to happen. So the way you get what I'm talking about is that you empower all of the employees, 10,000, 100,000. You empower all of them to not only come up with ideas, but to test their ideas. And now you've got this huge cross-section. Now you have replicated the ecosystem, and you have all of the diversity of thinking and the backgrounds and the expertise and interdisciplinary and cross-functional, and they can form teams and they can try their ideas out and generate evidence. That's how you're going to bubble up where your growth opportunities come from. It's leveraging all of the assets that you already have. It's playing to your advantage.
I love that metaphor in terms of the numbers comparing the innovation lab with the startup. And I still agree, and I still believe, though, that a lot of the company, if they don't continue to innovate, if they don't continue to change to fit the market, as the demographic change, as the customer expectation change, a lot of them are going to be disrupted and not able to survive. Now,
right.
I love it.
Right, but I agree with you. They do have to continue to change, but then that has to just be part of their daily work.
That is correct.
That's the whole balancing of execution and exploration. And if you empower those people to do it, then I think you have everything that you need already there. Inside of these large corporations, there's already a lot of agile. There's a lot of design thinking. There's a lot of human-centered design. So even inside these large companies, they already have the capability. They need to democratize that capability, and they need to do agile in a better way. I think they get locked into scaled agile frameworks that are not agile in their true nature. And so there's, they need those type of things. But I don't know. I guess, I fundamentally believe that if you give smart people a wicked problem, they'll solve it. But you have to empower them, and you have to give them the resources, and you have to give them specific ways to hold them accountable, which really gets back to the analytics that you talk about. And so giving that teams those things and then empowering them to go and solve the problems, they're going to figure it out. The biggest thing that big corporations have to do is get out of their people's way.
That is correct. And I suppose my follow-up question for that was, how could they empower them? And how could they empower their 10,000 people on the ground to do those things while believing that in the long run, it will yield a better result as opposed to have them 100% on their daily tasks?
Yeah, I think that people need to be trained. And I think that leaderships, they're learning all of these soft skills. The leader consulting is a huge industry now, and they're learning empathy and vulnerability and empowerment and these type of things. And that's great. And I think that has to continue. We need to help leaders figure out how to establish that in their daily work. I think agile is the right way to go. I think agile is the new unit of work. And so you have to create teams, and you have to start empowering those teams by giving them missions, and the missions tell what they're responsible for achieving, and it tells them how their achievements are going to be measured. And you allow those teams to operate as self-organized agile teams to go and work on their mission. The biggest dilemma there is that I've run across is that middle management now has a new role. They are typically in the past responsible for telling those people what to do, and they no longer get to do that because those teams themselves are empowered to do it. And so we have to find a different role for the middle management. I call this stream of streams. They're responsible for creating the agile teams and for providing the missions and aligning those missions with their group or division or department's priorities. And then there's maybe another layer that's responsible for aggregating that and making sure that those tie to company priorities. The middle management then is also responsible for communications. And so the communications takes the information that's coming from the teams, makes sure that there's a larger context that is being kept in mind, that those teams are coordinated and integrated into the larger purpose, and that information is shared up to leadership as well as all across the organization, so that other parts of the organization that are maybe working in completely different divisions or departments or business units can be aware, if they so choose, of all of the things that are going on in the other departments. That cross-functional communication, that cross-division communication is key. And that's really how you create this organization that is able to be resilient, to bounce back from disruption and bounce back from the pandemic. And there's multiple entities that are working in parallel, and you've got redundant supply chains and redundant systems, and you've got this increased awareness of what's going on inside the company as well as in the ecosystem and the environment and the economy. And you're teaching people and agile people moving quickly and being dynamic and being able to change what they're working on based upon this flow of information. So there's a lot of work to be done. Clearly, there's a lot of work to be done, but it really starts with organizing people into teams of 7 to 9, 7 to 10 people, giving them a mission, holding them accountable based on specific metrics and behavior that's ruled by the values of the company, and giving them the resources they need to go solve the problem. And they'll go out and start solving the problems, and the rest can be figured out as you have people solving problems.
I love it. I think that is a great suggestion. Now that brings us almost to the end of this interview, and I will have my usual question for you. Number one is, what is your most important first principle?
I think fundamentally empathy drives all of this. So I think that number one, not only us as human beings, individuals in our homes, like I mentioned, meeting strangers outside or friends, as well as employees, colleagues, and leadership, we need to seek to understand each other deeper. And it doesn't mean that you have to like the person. You don't have to hug them. You don't have to do what they say. You can go back home later and judge them if you wish. But developing empathy is this idea of understanding people where they're coming from, why they view what they view, and just without judgment, getting to this level of hearing, of listening and understanding where they are. It's fundamental to everything that we're doing here in this digital age. And anybody can learn how to do it. You have to pause, you have to slow down, you have to learn how to listen, you have to sort of suspend your judgment mode. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to do what they say. It just means understanding why do they come to the conclusion that they come to. And when you're out building products or making policy decisions or deciding what you're going to do next as an individual, you can choose to use that information or choose not to. It's up to you. But it starts with that idea of developing empathy.
That is so true, that everything that we do is really driven by business. And I really love this saying that it's not B2C, it's not B2B. The business is really just always about the people to people. So understanding people is so crucial, man.
Yeah, B to H, business to human.
Now, my other final question for you is, what is one book that you have read and thought it would have been better for your younger self to have?
Man, there's so many. What book have I not read that would have helped me when I was younger? For that specific question, I think I'm going to go with Brene Brown's Dare to Lead. I have a bunch of books I would love to recommend, but Dare to Lead by Brene Brown really is that is just the leadership book. And a leadership book is for everybody because everybody is a leader in some way in their life. And it really talks about the empathy and vulnerability and empowering people. And so I think it just will serve absolutely anybody that reads that book.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Brett, for coming on to the Analytic Show podcast and sharing all of those knowledge.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a fun conversation.
Indeed. Thank you so much.